Hi, guys. I'm Phil Martin. I'm with the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, and this is the Friday on film video that I do every week. It replaces a column I used to write, which sometimes I will still write, but I'm not writing this week for for whatever reason. Anyway, I'm teaching a class. Just started last week, a week ago. My second class is actually today, so. And I don't know how it's going because I'm doing it on Zoom. I'm doing it from my office here, my studio. And I'm basically having to talk at people a lot. What I really like to do when I'm in a classroom setting is not so much lecture as kind of read the room and, have a conversation, do sort of a symposium kind of style thing where everybody is talking respectfully, but we're having a conversation with everybody who's in the room, and that's really hard to do on a platform like Zoom, or in a situation like this where you basically have the camera focused on one thing. So I'm adjusting to that, and I'm starting to realize that it's not so easy being in front of the camera as sometimes I think it is. I mean, my whole idea about acting, and I've done a little bit of acting, not a terrible amount, but I did plays in high school and a little bit beyond, and I had some. I played George in Our Town, and I've had some roles way back 40 years ago now, but I still have always thought that the thing about acting was that it was the ability to be unself-conscious on camera, to, as Ringo Starr says, act naturally while people are looking at you. And I don't normally feel weird about people looking at me, but sometimes when I'm staring at this camera, it changes things. And it makes me wonder about documentaries, and I think about the D.A. Pennebaker film "Don't Look Back," where Bob Dylan is on a tour of England, and he's so obviously aware of the camera and playing to the camera. And I thought about the Rolling Stone review, a Rolling Thunder review film that came out last year, the Martin Scorsese film, that was kind of a tricky, and still don't get the joke. It's sort of like, we're going to tell you a bunch of stuff that isn't true and stick some weird interviews in here that aren't real, and then we'll have the rest of the real footage of the tour. And there's a remarkable scene in that movie where Joni Mitchell plays Coyote, and I think it's allegedly for the first time, but she's playing it with Stephen Stills and Bob Dylan, and they're playing it in Gordon Lightfoot's house, and it's just this amazingly smooth, polished, wonderful rendition of it. It's a great song, and she performs it greatly, and I just don't, sort of like, I kind of wonder if it wasn't rehearsed. I kind of wonder if they didn't set the cameras up and try it a couple times and try a couple of different things. I mean, the illusion is that you're there and that you're watching this unfold in real time as it happens. And there's something to the musical performance. I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's overdubbed or that they went back and spliced different, performances together. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that it's a little too good to be just off the top of your head, just to be just improvised in the moment. And I was a couple of documentaries that are in our DVD thing this week. One is Belushi, and the other which is good film, really good film. If you didn't see it on Showtime, I think it's still on Showtime. You can see it there, but it's also coming out on DVD this week. R.J. Cutler's sort of corrective to the narrative of Wired, which was the Bob Woodward book that came out in 1984, 2 years after Belushi's death, and sort of portrayed him as this, out of control wild man who had just these huge appetites. And I mean, I don't even think that Woodward's book, which I read at the time, was the most unsympathetic thing I've ever read, but it was kind of, I think, hard for people who cared about Belushi and were friends of Belushi to take, as any book about somebody who is reckless and wild sometimes, but is also your friend, might be hard to accept in that context. I have a friend who was a terrible drunk and got in trouble a lot, and he ended up dying by walking down the middle of a highway when there were cars at night, and he finally got hit and someone finally killed him, and everybody could see it was coming for a long time. Still, people who loved him and cared about him did not want to hear in the wake of that about what a drunk he was. So anyway, and then that's just one side of any person. I mean, Belushi obviously was a very talented man, and he obviously had some demons, but he also seemed to be capable of a wonderful generosity, and people loved him. You know, his friends loved him, and it's nice to see that, even coming as late as it has. You know, almost 40 years after his death, you get this corrective, and that's really, you know, it really was one of those films that made me feel really good during lockdown and all that, and I would highly recommend that. The other one I haven't watched, which is The Candy Darling, I'm going to watch that probably today, probably this afternoon. In fact, I'm going to audition that and see if it's something that I might want to show my Life Quest class, okay? But it's also a biographical documentary about someone who died a long time ago. Candy Darling actually died in 1974. She was 29 years old. You may remember that she did a couple of movies for Andy Warhol. She was a Warhol superstar, as he called them. But she sort of migrated, I mean, not sort of, she migrated into, you know, more mainstream films, smaller parts. She was in Clute with Donald Sutherland and Jane Fonda, for instance. And for someone who knows very little about her individually, but I do know quite a bit about the Warhol factory and the milieu of the late '60s, and I'm very interested, and I'm going to definitely watch that. But anyway, I was wondering if you think, do you often think or think about the first movie you ever saw? First one you can remember, and the circumstances under which you saw it. The first one I can sort of remember is My Turn at Bad, which I think that's what it's called. But it had Mickey Mantle, and it was Roger Maris in it, and I think Yogi Berra was in it, and it was right after the 1961 season where Maris hit 61 home runs and Mantle hit 50-something, and they had the big race to see who was going to unseat Babe Ruth as the single-season home run record holder. And I don't really remember the film, but I do remember confusing the film with real life because I was like 4 years old. And I sort of have this vague memory of like Roger Maris and Mickey Mantle coming to my school, my preschool, and talking to us. And I know this didn't happen. I just have, this is the way I've mixed up the movie in my mind. And it also is sort of a little weird because my father knew Mickey Mantle very slightly, or had met Mickey Mantle or something. And that gets mixed up in this, and it becomes like, you know, like one of those, you wake up from a dream and you're still believing in the dream, even though you sort of understand how. But I know I saw that movie, and it's the perfect film for me to have seen first. You know, it was like my first movie going experience, given my background and given how I've turned out and what my interests are and stuff like that. But the very first movie that I there's another memory I want to get to. And I told this story to my class, is that when I was like 9 years old, I went to see Bonnie and Clyde. Or did I? What I went to was this matinee where they were playing the newsreel about Bonnie and Clyde being captured, or not captured, being assassinated, being shot to death on the road, Highway 154, south of Arcadia, Louisiana, on the way to Gibbsland, Louisiana. And the marker the place where they were shot is actually right. If you go past that marker, through the barbed wire fence, that land used to be owned by my sister, who had a quarter horse farm there, and she got rid of it, 15, 20 years ago. But that's where it used to be, and I used to go out there and look at the bullet-pocked marker where Bonnie and Clyde were shot. But way before that, in 1967, I went to the movies, and I took my little sister with me, who was a year younger, and we went to the movies, and we watched Bonnie and Clyde, only we didn't. But I believed we did, because we saw the newsreel, probably saw a bunch of cartoons, probably saw a bunch of black and white, but we saw the old newsreel that was being, because the film was out at the time. And then afterwards we went out and we toured this little van they had set up that had one of the 1934 Model A Fords, Desert Sand, all shot to pieces, that were touring as Bonnie and Clyde's death car. Now, was it Bonnie and Clyde's death car? There is some debate on how many cars like that there were that were serving in this purpose. So, may have been, may not have been, but anyway, they had, Clyde Barrow's death mask on the back seat and this gold glittery thing, and they had all these weapons there and knives and guns and stuff like that. And it was a really charming afternoon, you go see it. But the thing is that until maybe, I don't know, till really I started interrogating myself, because I'm working on a book about my movie experiences. I just took it for granted that was when I saw Bonnie and Clyde. But then, you start thinking about it and go, wait a minute. Your parents dropped you and your sister off when you're 9 and 8 to go see Bonnie and Clyde. I don't think so. Or 8 and 7, or whatever we were, That doesn't add up. Number two, it was a matinee show in California. I can still kind of see the theaters, but it was a small theater. It wasn't and it was wasn't all that well attended. There were people there, but it wasn't super crowded as far as I remember. But I know I had seen Bonnie and Clyde by the time that Butch Sundance, the Sundance Kid, came out, and I have a very clear memory of Butch and Sundance. Butch and Sundance, running out at the end of the movie to confront the federales who have them surrounded, and it freeze frames. And I remember sitting there in the movie theater with my father, who'd taken me to it, and we sat there and we talked about it for a while. We talked about, and we didn't talk about why did he freeze the frame or whatever, but we did talk about the fact that Butch and Sundance were real people and, stuff like that. And at the time, at least as best I can remember, I had a reference in my head to the ending of Bonnie and Clyde, where Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker get shot up. And then in the movie, as opposed to real life, Clyde gets out of the car and he's walking around, and then these birds fly off, and he looks and he knows he's dead. He knows he's being ambushed, and they shoot him to pieces, and he falls over and flips around. It's in slow motion, and it's, and Faye Dunaway's body is jerking like this, and it's just To our modern eye, it's sort of corny. It's not, I mean, what Arthur Penn wanted it to be and what it felt like in the moment in the 70s and 67 was that it felt like really graphic, horrible violence. And that's how it was treated by the critics and people like that. We have now, in this post-Tarantino age, have gotten a different feel for what realistic violence wanted, but he wanted it to be realistic. He wanted the whole movie to be realistic, which is why they filmed a lot in the towns where Bonnie and Clyde had robbed their banks, used some of the same banks. The palette, it's color, but it's not that really, saturated Technicolor look that we associate with a lot of movies from the 60s. One of the problems I've read about was that Faye Dunaway was so luminous, she was so pretty, that there was really no way to, make her look more ordinary, which is what they tried. I mean, they have these two incredibly charismatic people in the car, and they overexposed the outside of the car, underexposed the inside, trying to get these different looks so they would kind of like look like real people rather than movie stars. And they never did succeed in making Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway look like anything other than movie stars. But anyway, by the time I had seen Butch and Sundance, which came out, in 1970, I believe. I'm not looking that up. I mean, let's say I saw it in 71. So in that window, I had somehow actually seen the real Bonnie and Clyde, the real movie. And I don't know what the schedule was like. Maybe I saw it on television in 1969, which would have been a drastically different experience than seeing it in the theater. It would be, it would have been cut probably, and it certainly would have had some of the language bleeped. And I'm not sure that they would have, like the scene where the bank teller runs after the car and jumps up on the running board, and Clyde, his first killing, Clyde shoots him through the glass, and it's all of a sudden that's this moment where this sort of movie turns from this kind of jazzy, romantic kind of comedy thing to this, real crime movie where these people are real killers and real bad people, and we learn that they're real bad people right there in that moment. And that's a really important moment in American film history, I think. I think that's where you first get that sort of graphics thing. Oh, instead of, the cowboy and Indians think, oh, I'm shot, or grabbing things and falling over. You just have this, there's a hole in the guy's head all of a sudden. It just appears there. And Clyde's horrified, and, everybody's horrified. But the movie picks up from there, and we have our inevitable end. So, the mystery is, for me, is when did I actually see the movie and how did I see it? And I don't think I'm ever going to sort that out. And I guess it doesn't matter. But what it probably means is I probably saw this, the original Bonnie and Clyde, in this television, version of it. And that's what I'm guessing. I'm guessing I saw a television version of it. And then later I saw the cinematic version, and it sort of filled in some holes or whatever in my head. And now I've seen the film probably 20 times, over the course of my life. So I have this platonic Bonnie and Clyde I carry around in my head. I pretty much know it scene by scene, not line by line. I don't do that kind of thing like some people do. But, I'm pretty familiar with the movie. I'm not going to be surprised if I watch it again, though I always see different things, which goes to the whole point of you never seen the same movie as anyone else, and you've never seen the same movie twice. So, I would like to do the series about my first movie, and have people talk about what they remember from their first movie-going experience. I don't know if it's going to be profitable to actually do that, because most people are going to say, well, I saw The Exorcist, but or I saw, but maybe there are people who have vivid memories of these things, or vivid false memories of these things. And if you've got one, please get in touch with me. I'd really like to hear it. I'd really like to know about these memories, the first movie you saw. And maybe at some point we can start doing a little thing in the newspaper about that, about the first, experience you had in a movie theater. I think it might be really nice to collect those, especially now in this day and age when movie theaters, obviously because of COVID, are not as important to us now as they were in the 30s, obviously, or even last year or 2 years ago before the COVID. I've got a dog barking. That also happens around here, and we don't shut the studio door or anything like that. So, yeah. But that's my basically what I talked about last week. And this week I'm going to talk about Platoon. So if you're a member of LiveQuest, or you would like to be a member of LiveQuest, call them up and join. And you can watch me babble on like I babble on. And maybe further down the line, we're going to show some interesting films in this class. But what I'd really like to do right now is, if you do have a memory of your movie, send it to me, pmartin at adgnewsroom.com. I guess you could leave a comment down below, but I don't really look at them, and this is going to be several places, this video. So just send me the email, and we will, maybe do something about that. I think that's a really fascinating idea, the first movie, and try to excavate those earliest movies. And I'm talking about, actually going to the movies, not watching something on TV, not watching a VHS or DVD at home. Your first experience in a cinema. I have a couple that are, Red Sky at Morning's one, and I had been to movies many times by the time I saw that. But that's the time that I stopped eating movie popcorn. And I stopped eating movie popcorn because the smell in the theater was just so rich of that butter, salt. It made me a little nauseous. And every time I want to, suppress my appetite, it still works as a trigger. So if I get a little bit like, I'm just bored, I don't want to, I'm hungry, I'm not really hungry, I just want to eat because I'm bored, I start thinking about that day in the theater in 1970, Red Sky at Morning, and that smell of the popcorn. And it's just, wonderful appetite suppressant. So anyway, my point is, you can use these movies for all kinds of things, and these memories for all kinds of things, and it's really kind of a cool thing. I would like to ask you to tune in next week, read our paper this week, and we'll see you next week.